We interrupt your regularly scheduled podcast with some breaking news. Millions of people are now playing the mobile puzzle game Royal Kingdom. This is not a drill. Royal Kingdom has thousands of levels and is incredibly fun. What's that? I'm hearing from my producer that it has no ads. And it is completely free to download? What's next? You're gonna tell me it doesn't need Wi-Fi? This just in, Royal Kingdom doesn't need Wi-Fi to play. We will continue to keep you updated as this story develops, but get it today and see for yourself. Download it on the Google Play or App Store today.
When you think about meal kit companies, what do you see? Probably long, complicated recipes and subscriptions you can't escape. But with the new Blue Apron, we're doing meal delivery differently. No subscription needed. Faster, easier meals. And the same dedication to quality we've always had. Shop 100+ meals at blueapron.com. Get 50% off your first 2 orders with code APRON50. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
And welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And today I want to talk about war and remembrance, and how in Western countries, I think in particular, and not exclusively in Western countries, but in the victor countries of the Second World War, remembrance has become a kind of secular religion. Often it's combined with non-secular religion, combined with Christianity. And if you look at comparatively at Britain and America, and we're going to look mainly at America because we're looking at Keith Lowe's brilliant book Prisoners of History today, but I want to just he has some observations about the kind of the greatest generation veneration in America. But if you start off with Great Britain and look at the slightly different culture that exists here around Remembrance Sunday, or Poppy Day as it is better known, this is in the last 20 years, particularly since Iraq, this has kind of metastasized into something really quite toxic in many ways. Very simply, for those that aren't kind of immersed in British culture, after the First World War, the Royal British Legion and the Poppy Appeal, based on the kind of the growth of poppies in the churned up land, no man's lands of the Western Front that grew after the war. All the artillery shells stimulated poppy growth. This was a kind of a poignant reminder to the war dead. The Poppy Appeal for the Royal British Legion for veterans in the interwar period emerged, and it was actually Field Marshal Douglas Haig, the so-called Butcher of the Somme, who was a chief figure in the providing and the developing of the British Legion. After the Second World War, every Sunday, every Sunday closest to November the 11th, which is when the First World War armistice was signed on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, is designated as Remembrance Sunday. And it has for most of the last century been a time of solemn reflection. There's a war memorial in virtually every town and village in the whole of Great Britain. And it's a time to, in theory, reflect on the senselessness of war. In the past 20 years, it has been co-opted by the far right, and there has been, partly as a result of the Labour government's, the Blair Labour government's attempts to kind of sell the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War as kind of nationally supported conflicts, which they weren't. They had a very, very narrow appeal. There was a kind of a recrudescence of nationalist fervour, hugely manufactured, around the idea of the poppy and commemoration and sacrifice by heroic soldiers on our behalf. And then there was an attempt in 2014, at the height of the Conservative government, to slightly kind of refashion the memory of the First World War. And the memory of the First World War in Britain has been refashioned consistently since the end of the war. And it's been through different iterations, but there was a kind of like a Cameron government iteration in which it was sold as the kind of the Great War for freedom and civilization and all this kind of stuff, which, arguably only in the last kind of year of the war was there any suggestion that remotely liberal values were being fought for. And then at the Paris Peace Conference, those went, for the most part, go up in smoke between the machinations of the British and the French. So the argument that this is a kind of struggle for freedom is a pretty thin gruel, to be honest with you. But the character now of commemoration has become so enmeshed with the politics of the far right, with this culture of veteran worship, which is deeply insincere. I mean, the idea that our great grandparents were involved in a global anti-fascist war often is kind of lost on some of the kind of the protesters you see in Trafalgar Square on an almost daily basis. And you have, I mean, in the last couple of years, particularly in 2023, at the beginnings of the protests for Gaza, Suella Braverman, the then Conservative Home Secretary, essentially coordinating with the far right street agitator Tommy Robinson to have this is happening in a British democracy. Neo-Nazi street thugs descending on the cenotaph at the same time, with clearly the hope that the neo-Nazis and Palestine protesters would meet, and then the government could step in and ban anti-Palestine protests. So that's a sort of the kind of the level that we've sunk to in Britain when it comes to kind of commemoration. And there is a kind of an almost poppy-like hysteria in in November, which has become deeply entwined with kind of a wider nostalgia culture, anti-immigration, and a sense that it was a, a white people's war that was fought, and that the gains from that war, and this is all kind of totally garbled neo-Nazi kind of illogic and nonsense. But the the men that stormed the beaches at Normandy, well, they wouldn't recognise this country today. Hint, hint, nod, nod. And it's racism needs to be expressed through the language of euphemism, as for the most part, even in these kinds of febrile times, overt racist rhetoric is unacceptable. So it needs to be kind of subcommunicated and inferred. So that's not to say that there aren't kind of legitimate acts of commemoration. I mean, of course there are. So that's kind of a bit of the British context. But I wanted to start with that because when Keith Lowe, British historian, talks about American World War II commemoration, he talks from it from the perspective of the outsider, and it's as removed a culture from British or European perspectives as, say, the commemoration of the war dead in China or Russia. It's it seems like an obvious thing to say, but it's only obvious when you actually say it, that even Allied powers, their ways of seeing the past are hugely different. And also, not just official, but popular ways of seeing the past are hugely different. And that is often about the kind of the emotional resonance that the past has. So, this is from the book Prisoners of History by Keith Lowe. He writes, "In my working life, I often travel to different parts of the world giving lectures about the Second World War. In one particular lecture, I talk about America's mythology of heroism. It's a subject that fascinates me because, to Europeans like me, it seems so extreme. America sometimes seems to regard their war heroes as if they were not human at all, but figures from legend, or even saints. President Reagan spoke of them as a Christian army, impelled by faith and blessing by God. President Clinton called them freedom's warriors, who had immortalized themselves by fighting the forces of darkness. TV journalist Tom Brokaw famously proclaimed them as the greatest generation any society has ever produced. How can any real-life soldier or veteran possibly live up to such expectations? I've noticed that reactions to my lecture differ depending on where I deliver it. Whenever I'm in America, my audience tends to listen respectfully in silence. Some agree with me and some don't. But when I give this lecture in Europe, the audience tends to snigger. At one point, when I quote at length from a speech given by Bill Clinton to commemorate the 50th anniversary of VE Day, they sometimes laugh out loud. American rhetoric, to many Europeans, sounds ridiculous. It is always nice to get a laugh when you're speaking, but there is something about this particular laughter that worries me. Europeans often make fun of America's insular view of the world, but they themselves are often equally ignorant of America. They don't mean to be disrespectful. They simply can't quite believe that anyone is serious when they speak about their war veterans in this way. But Americans are deadly serious. In the American consciousness, the role that their soldiers played during the Second World War has come to represent everything that is best about their country. This gulf in understanding between Europeans and Americans is immediately apparent as soon as one looks at their war memorials. America makes monuments to its heroes. Europe makes much more, makes often monuments to its victims. American monuments are triumphant. European ones are melancholy. American monuments are idealistic, while European ones, occasionally at least, are more likely to be morally ambiguous. If America does not understand Europe, it's because America never suffered as Europe or Asia did. And I think this is the kind of the root of the matter. Now, it's not to say that America didn't sacrifice large numbers of people in the Second World War. It certainly did, in the hundreds of thousands. However, the American cities were not bombed. American populations were not rounded up and exterminated or deported. There was no destruction of Warsaw. America didn't experience the Blitz. America didn't experience a Dunkirk or a fall of France. And so to the European perspective and worldview, from Italy, where at the end of the war there's a famine, and then a preceding kind of low-level civil war, where fascists and anti-fascists fought it out, to Germany, where at the end of the war there are millions of displaced people, widespread destruction. The German population know that they have participated in the extermination of the Jews, and the Red Army is on their soil. To other parts of Europe, again the Netherlands, there's a famine there in 1944, and the country during the liberation of the country is a battleground, and there is this kind of spectre also of collaboration for many of the occupied countries. So the American mass production and manpower created the vital things required in order to win the war. And without America's intervention, no doubt the war against Nazism would have been unwinnable. But the degree of trauma experienced in Europe, and also, let us not forget, in Asia, is something that does not and shapes the psyches, the popular psyches and memories and imaginations of those parts of the world in a way it can't and doesn't shape America. The vast majority of Americans only ever experienced the war through images brought home by film units and war photographers, which did not always give the most truthful or complete picture of what was taking place. Some of the most famous American monuments to the war are based on these photographs, and it's no wonder that they portray a rather idealistic view. If Europe does not understand America, however, it's for very different reasons. Europeans have failed to grasp the fact that the American depth of feeling about the war comes not from a sense of history, but from a sense of identity. The war is nothing but a screen upon which they have projected much deeper ideas and emotions that are right at the heart of the American psyche. In other words, when public figures in America wax lyrical about the war, they aren't really talking about the war at all. This, as we shall see, is obvious as soon as one takes a closer look at the war memorials. One of the best-loved memorials to American heroism during the Second World War is the Marine Corps Memorial in Arlington, Virginia. It stands at the very heart of American power, not far from the Pentagon building, with an unrestricted view across the Potomac River to the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and the U.S. Capitol. It is undeniably one of the most important monuments in the country. Strictly speaking, this isn't a Second World War memorial at all. It's a memorial to all the Marines who've fallen since the formation of the Corps in 1775. But it was built in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War and paid for by donations from Marines who'd served during that war. Furthermore, it's based on one of the most iconic images from 1945, Joe Rosenthal's photograph of the moment when a group of Marines raised a flag on Mount Suribachi during the battle for the island of Iwo Jima. A reconstruction, as I think it was. The memorial depicts 6 soldiers, their weapons slung over their shoulders, standing on a patch of jagged, unforgiving ground. Like all statues we've seen so far, they are colossal, more than 5 times taller than an average man. The figure at the front of the group leans forward, his body almost horizontal, using all his weight to drive a gigantic flagpole into the ground. Those behind him are hunched together, trying also to lend their weight to the task. At the back of the group, one of the Marines stretches upwards, his fingers not quite reaching the pole. Beneath him, on the black granite plinth, are Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz's words summing up the performance of the Marines at Iwo Jima. Uncommon valour was a common virtue. Like all good memorials, this one tells a story. However, it's a story with many layers, and to understand it properly, one needs to go right back to the beginning of the conflict.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Stuck on your commute again? Bad Wi-Fi? No signal? Nothing to do? Time to make your ride a lot more fun with Royal Kingdom. It's a puzzle game that's relaxing, challenging, and works perfectly offline. With no ads and amazing graphics, every level feels fresh and satisfying. Each round only takes a few minutes, ideal for a daily commute or wherever you have a little bit of time. So download Royal Kingdom now on Google Play or App Store.
Stuck in a dinner rut? Let Cook Unity handle dinner with chef-crafted meals delivered right to your door. Cook Unity makes it easy with new menu drops, weekly recommendations, and a growing community of award-winning chefs. Plus, over 400 flavorful meals for every palate. Shake up your meal routine. Go to cookunity.com/mealtime50 or enter code mealtime50 before checkout for 50% off your first week. That's cookunity.com/mealtime50.
Getting more as a MyLowe's Pro Rewards member is easier than ever with the Lowe's app. Download it today and earn 500 points the first time you log in. Plus, your digital wallet helps you scan, save, earn, and access what you need to manage it all in one place. Download the Lowe's app and take advantage of your Pro benefits today. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid 12/1/25 through 1/7/26. Offer valid for first login per organization only. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Additional restrictions apply. Visit Lowe's.com/terms for more details. Subject to change.
Before we look at the story of Iwo Jima, I think it's important just to pause and look at the kind of the context of post-war American life, particularly, and the way in which veterans, white veterans anyway, were treated after the end of the war, with the GI Bill and the upsurge in prosperity, post-war prosperity, that Americans experienced, partly because of the mass production of the war, and also the fact that America inherited kind of one-off almost global circumstances, extraordinary good fortune in a way, and the relationship not only between the war and the fact that it was fought not on American soil, and the sacrifices made by veterans, and the fact that the war was broadly successful as far as America was concerned, and the fact that it ushered in 3 decades of extraordinary post-war prosperity, power, and influence. It was America's moment from going from kind of world power to superpower status, and the beginnings of a world role that's lasted only really up until now. This is now in 2025 that world role is going through perhaps it's a terminal kind of convulsion. And of course, American internationalism wasn't always widely accepted by the American population itself. There was a fear at the end of the Second World War and the beginning of the Cold War, amongst the British particularly, that America could return to isolation, and there was a very strong political lobby in America to do that. And throughout the post-war era, there's been this kind of schism in American public debate of, yes, sure, we did some great things, and we saved the world. However, is this really our responsibility? Yes, we stand up to the communists, but is it our responsibility to be the world's policeman? And a valid question. Keith Lowe writes, America's war began on the 7th of December 1941 when the Japanese launched their notorious attack on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. This remains one of the defining events of American history. For 90 minutes, hundreds of Japanese planes bombed American ships, airfields and port facilities, killing more than 2,400 people and wounding almost 1,200 more. 21 ships were sunk and 188 military aircraft destroyed. The attack came as a complete surprise because the US Secretary of State did not receive a declaration of war until after it had begun. The sense of shock that this produced in American society is impossible to overstate. Its only recent parallel has been the terrorist attack of 9/11. The logic behind the military strike was simple. Japan wanted to take control of the whole Pacific region and knew that in order to do so, they would have to discourage America from stepping in. The Japanese leadership did not think that America had the stomach for a long war in the Pacific and were willing to gamble that a quick, decisive victory would force them to negotiate a settlement. In other words, Pearl Harbor was not supposed to start a war with America, it was supposed to prevent one. Anyone with even a cursory knowledge of US history could have told them that this was a risky strategy. America never gives up without a fight. Once they had recovered from their initial surprise, the American military responded with ruthless determination. Over the next 3.5 years, it clawed its way step by step back across the Pacific Ocean. It fought huge naval battles at the Coral Sea and Midway. It launched submarine strikes against Japanese supply lines. It liberated one island group after another. The Marines were often at the forefront of the action. The battles fought to secure Guadalcanal, Tarawa, the Marshall Islands, the Mariana Islands, and Palau were some of the most brutal of the whole war. At this time, Japanese soldiers were considered notorious for their viciousness and their refusal to surrender, and inflicted terrible casualties on less experienced Americans. Before long, the US Marines were repaying them in kind, taking few prisoners, and occasionally massacring them after they'd been disarmed. Reports and photographs of atrocities by either side rarely made it back home to America, because the US censors wished to spare the public both the anguish and the shame of what was really going on. Eventually, US forces advanced all the way to the shores of Japan. The first island they reached was Iwo Jima. After 4 days of savage fighting, a group of Marines managed to fight their way to the top of Mount Suribachi, the highest point of the island. To signal that they'd reached the summit, they attached a US flag to a length of piping and raised it. Later that day, a second group of Marines brought a larger flag to replace it, and war photographer Joe Rosenthal was there to capture it for posterity. See, the fall of Iwo Jima was a kind of an existential moment for Japan, because Iwo Jima was to become an airfield from which B-29 bombers could devastate Japanese cities with impunity.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled podcast with some breaking news. Millions of people are now playing the mobile puzzle game Royal Kingdom. This is not a drill. Royal Kingdom has thousands of levels and is incredibly fun. What's that? I'm hearing from my producer that it has no ads. And it is completely free to download? What's next? You're going to tell me it doesn't need Wi-Fi? This just in, Royal Kingdom doesn't need Wi-Fi to play. We will continue to keep you updated as this story develops, but get it today and see for yourself. Download it on the Google Play or App Store today.
This is the new Weight Watchers. It works for members like Jojo, who's learning simple, healthy habits, Sharia, who's making progress with meds, and Kim, who still gets to eat what she loves. For over 60 years, we've helped millions of members find what works for them. Now, it's your turn. Watch your life open up. Watch your story shift. Watch what you're capable of. Watch it work. Get started today at WeightWatchers.com.
Keith Lowe writes, "It's this second flag raising that the Marine Corps Memorial immortalises in bronze. The sculpture is a study in determination. The effort required to plant a flag is plain to see. Each one of the 6 figures appears to be straining every sinew. They are the personification of American grit. The sculpture is also a study in unity. These Americans are all working together in harmony, their hands placed on the same pole, their legs bent in parallel with one another. It's a study in violence, more so perhaps than any other American monument to the war. No Japanese soldiers are being killed here, but the force with which the 6 men are driving the flag into the hostile foreign ground is at least suggestive of something darker, which the US censor never allowed the American people to see. Most of all, this is a study in vengeance. The story that begins with Pearl Harbor ends with American troops raising the flag on Japanese soil. In this sense, it's as stark a warning as the statue to the motherland in Volgograd, or the great statue commemorating Stalingrad. This is what happens to anyone who dares to attack America. All these qualities would have been keenly felt by those who stood before the memorial when it was first unveiled in November 1954. Three of the men depicted in the sculpture were present at the inauguration ceremony, as were the mothers of the other three who'd been killed shortly after Joe Rosenthal's iconic photograph was taken. They and the 5,000 other attendees, many of whom had direct experience of the Pacific War, would have good cause to nurture some of the darker emotions inspired by that monument. But the vengeance and grim determination are not qualities that explain the reverence with which the majority of Americans regard the monument. The thousands of people who came each year to pay their respects or to watch one of the sunset parades that are performed in front of the monument during the summer months are not here to celebrate violence. There's clearly something else going on. To understand this, one must move one's gaze from the figures at the front of the monument to those at the back. These men are not driving a spike into the soil, they are reaching their hands up as if to heaven. Above them flies the US flag. The figure right at the back is trying to touch the flagpole, his outstretched hands not quite reaching it. The effect is reminiscent of Michelangelo's famous painting of Adam stretching his hands towards God in the Sistine Chapel in Rome. Felix de Weldon, the artist who sculptured the memorial, explained the image in a speech at the inauguration in 1954. The hands of these men reaching out, he said, are groping for that which may be beyond one's means to attain, needing assistance from the power above, that power which we all need in times of adversity, and without whose guidance our efforts might well be fruitless. This divine guidance is symbolized by the flag above them, which de Weldon calls the emblem of our unity, our power, our thoughts, and our purpose as a nation. In other words, the real subject of the sculpture is not the US Marines at all, nor the victory of the Japanese, nor anything else to do with the Second World War. It is the flag which gives the monument its real meaning. This symbol, with its fusion of God and nation, is the reason why the memorial is so well loved in America. All of these things, all of these monuments, wherever you go, are signifiers and symbols of national identity and purpose and narrative and story. They are things that we look at, and to ask, who are we? Or, if it's not your culture and not where you come from, who are they? And they are there as means and of all kind of public spaces, public monuments, public art, public this, public that, are there to help tell a story, and they are there to create a certain sense of being British or American or Chinese or Japanese or Russian or Soviet, and they do it with remarkable power and skill. And everybody, all the combatant nations of the Second World War, all had to craft their stories after the war. Sometimes very difficult stories to tell. Stories of heroism and victimhood, of blame shifting, and of vindication, of being favoured by God, of telling in the case of the British, telling a story of a war that was worthwhile fighting, where a lot of the evidence suggests otherwise, and a case in America of perhaps telling a story of a nation blessed by providence, where as it says in the book, the power of the flag of the nation and God are kind of intermingled and interconnected and indivisible. And it's for this reason I love talking about monuments, and historical memory in general. Okay. So we're getting closer, guys. I'm just going to do a bit of advertorial now. So we're getting closer to, and in the first week of January, I'm going to be putting live the study program we're going to be doing, and the Sundays are going to be our study days. I'm going to be doing something else as well. I don't want to kind of go into it too much now because I'm going to kind of confuse the message too much. But on Sundays as well, I'll be doing an extra little thing for students. I do all the normal content the rest of the week round, but Sundays are going to be a day for students, So there's going to be special episodes of the podcast, which you can access through a special link I'll put in. There's a little paywall, but I'm trying to make it as small as possible. And there'll be additional study notes and that kind of thing, and all sorts of handy stuff. But more on that when it comes about. Anyway, I hope you guys had a nice Christmas. It's great to be back. I've been really kind of biting my nails for the last few days. Wanting to kind of get back and get some recordings done. So here we are, and let's crack on. And there'll be sort of a few things out there between now and New Year's Eve. And then we'll hit 2026 running. Okay. All the rest. I'll catch you on the next podcast. Bye-bye.
Stuck in a dinner rut? Let Cook Unity handle dinner with chef-crafted meals delivered right to your door. Cook Unity makes it easy with new menu drops, weekly recommendations, and a growing community of award-winning chefs. Plus over 400 flavorful meals for every palate. Shake up your meal routine. Go to cookunity.com/mealtime50 or enter code mealtime50 before checkout for 50% off your first week. That's cookunity.com/mealtime50.
This is the new Weight Watchers. It works. For members like Jojo, who's learning simple, healthy habits, Sharia, who's making progress with meds, and Kim, who still gets to eat what she loves. For over 60 years, we've helped millions of members find what works for them. Now, it's your turn. Watch your life open up. Watch your story shift. Watch what you're capable of. Watch it work. Get started today at WeightWatchers.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.